Excellent. Okay. So I guess I'll just focus on one aspect of what we said last year, and then try and move forward a little bit. Yeah, I'm not going to go back to the first part of the memo of Rav Yehuda on Shmuel. He simply says, "Magoifes chavis shenichtza mutzah l'taltel b'Shabbos." Tanya nami hachi magoifes shenichtza hiva shaveh mutzah l'taltel b'Shabbos, etc. Then it says, "V'lo yisos mimenu lachasus b'os akli v'lismech b'akari mutzah." You can't. This word yispos was a little bit difficult to translate. I think Rashi translated the term as where we could have followed on base. Yeah, so Rashi, let's get this accurate. Rashi translated as Yatakein, Lahasib Litosa. So Rashi says Yispos means to somehow trim the lumps on it. In which case, according to Rashi, it's Makeh B'Patish. Rabbeinu Chananel and the Rif both learn that it's not to cut, Lo Yachtoch, not to cut. The Rambam in the positioning, in the translation, he says Lo Yitloish, so you shouldn't pluck off the cheres to do something with. And the location of the way the Rambam brings the halacha seems to imply that he understands this is a din in Muktza, not a separate melacha. So here I just want to pause for a minute because someone was asking me about this after Shiur and just comment on Derech HaLimud. So we have a Raisa, which in the middle of Hilchas Muktza, or talking about Muktza, says Magofa shenichtza hiva shaveh mutzah l'taltel b'Shabbos. That's clearly a Muktza halacha. And then it carries on, V'lo yisos mimenu shevet lachasus b'os akli, which according to Rashi is a melacha of Makeh B'Patish. And nonetheless, the Brisa puts this together. In Hilchas Brisa, no one is bothered by this. The structure of Gemara and Mishnayos and Brisas is organic, and it's perfectly reasonable for it to deal with halachas of a cheres and a magofis, the plug or seal of a cheres, of a chovis, I'm sorry, and put together two very different halachas. You should know that with respect to a broken chovis or a broken plug, there's hilchas muktzah to think about and there's hilchas melachos to think about. And that's perfectly legitimate in the derech halimud of Gemara and Brisas. And we see Mishnayos that do that the whole time. This is just familiar whenever you're like, well, the Gemara said, no, this isn't because of halacha muktzah, this is because of melacha, it's a completely different melacha. When it comes to the Rambam's very stated aim in his Mishnah Torah is to remove that problem and to be a structured sefer. So in his Akdama, the Rambam points out that if you want to know the whole of Hilchas Shabbos from Shas, you need to learn Masechet Shabbos, but you also need to learn Masechet Eruvin and Masechet Beitzah, because Beitzah deals with Muktza and Eruvin deals with Eruvin. And then you can find a Gemara in Baba Kama or in Sukkah or in Yuma or in Samura, they also need to know in order to understand Hilchas Shabbos, because in those Masechtas they'll happen to deal with Hilchas Shabbos, so it's organic. And in Shabbos you can learn halachas which are really important to how to build a sukkah or the laws of damages and torts and so on. So the Rambam's very explicit aim in Mishnah Torah is to be a structured work, and therefore we are in a sense more medayik by the structure of the Rambam's Perush than we would be in the Gemara or the Mishnah. And therefore the Nosei Kelim believe that this Rambam, which I put in the source sheets, in which the Rambam says, Cheres katana mutzah l'taltel afili b'shus rabim hol v'uyi b'chotzer chasus b'kli cotton. So he's quoting our Gemara. Magufas Chavis, that's the next Brisa. He's clearly structuring himself. The Rambam, in the way, says, and there's a pattern in the Rambam, that even though he wants to make a structured work, where possible, he tries to keep the language of the examples of the Gemara and the order of the Gemara. So he's doing that very much here. He's taking one sugya after another sugya. Magofas Chavis shenichtza hiva shaveh mutzah l'taltel. And then he says, which seems to be our Gemara of so it seems to be the same Gemara, and the Rambam seems to be therefore translating lo yitlosh as lo yispos. The truth is, whether it is the same Gemara or not, we now need to ask ourselves, why lo yitlosh? And the simplest answer to that question is because it's a melacha. But what's that got to do with Hilchas Muktza, which is what the Rambam is up to in his order of halacha? we don't know. It's a difficult Rambam. The Masechet Kelim, no doesn't struggle. The Masechet Kelim struggle with this. On the one hand, in the location of the Rambam, to say that he's now saying Halacha Makkah B'Patish goes against the very structure and stated aim of the Rambam, in which when you open the chapter on Makkah B'Patish, you can find all Halacha Makkah B'Patish. Why in the middle of Muktza is he throwing in Halacha Makkah B'Patish? On the other hand, what would exactly be the melachot over here, Lo Yitlosh? It must be the Rambam saying something in Hilchos Muktza that you can somehow be toilish in a mutter way, but nonetheless don't do so because the result will be creating a new Kelim. The issue isn't Makkah B'Patish. The issue is that would be Muktza. It's a little unclear what the Rambam is doing over here, and that remains fair. Sorry, Paul.
It wasn't suggested leafing it or like a leafy pot, so it doesn't actually have a full function, and therefore the chain doesn't necessarily apply to this type of pot.
It's a very good suggestion, and in a moment we're going to talk about the Shem Kli and how that refers to be Muchan or not. These are all good points, but again, I just want for now to zoom into our question, which is what's the translation of Lo Yitlosh and what's the problem with it? Rashi in the Brisa is happy to say the problem is a melacha. In the Rambam, it seems difficult. Again, I don't know. Maybe the Rambam did mean melacha, but in the Rambam, it's difficult to know what the issa is over here of Lo Yitlosh. The location the Rambam would suggest it's a Muktza dikadin. It's a din about Hilchas Muktza. It's funny that that's phrased Lo Yitlosh, but maybe he's doing that because he's cutting and pasting from the language of the Gemara, which is what the Rambam likes doing. But what he really means in this interpretation would be that the cut off, broken off shard that you get would be Muktza, because as you're correctly saying, it comes from something which is not Kedi, or it's not Muchan as a Kedi, or whatever it may be. I don't know. It's difficult. That would be the Muktza elements of it. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Sorry, Adam. Yeah.
It's just also interesting that he's referring to the Torah, which actually, like I said for the last time, the Gemara seems to be that this is referring to Megufa, which but actually he's gone back to.
Yes, that is an important point. As you said, we went into it last time, so I don't want to repeat it, but you are correct. The last time we discussed the pronouns in the Brisa, and Rashi learning that there's a switch in pronoun, that the nichtza is on the chavis, and the he is going on the magufas, and you're 100% right to line down in how the Rambam learns it. I think we saw last time a Iran and a Piskirid and so on that dealt with this. Not my own Rambam, I saw Piskirid quoted, but yeah. Yes.
Interesting, the Rambam says the Zaka did before the end, because in our price.
Yes. Yeah. If
thought maybe he's ending the halachas of Muktza.
Yes.
After the Taltula. So she mentioned Taltula in that state, and then he starts a new thing, which was the separate.
Yeah. The problem is, if the Rambam doesn't mean a halacha of Muktza, then that would explain why he changes the order. As you said, he finished Muktza and then adds an halacha. The problem is he carries on Hilchas Muktza. I mean, I don't know. It's still funny the location, but your point is a good point. Okay, let's move on. Is everyone with me? This yeah. Okay, so we were left with the puzzle in the Rambam. It's not the last time one doesn't understand everything, but that's the Rambam. We began now touching the next sugya, but this is where I think we finished the last year. In Zalka b'ashba osa. So if you threw it away, then it becomes Muktza. Translation: that throwing something away makes it Muktza. Why would throwing something away make it Muktza? Because of the essence of Muktza is that something is Muchan and useful. Throwing away means that it's not Muchan, at least to you, and not useful to you, and therefore it would become Muktza. That's the headline of the Brisa. Rav Papa is going to point out to us that we've taken that too far and we need to bring nuance into it. But that's what the Brisa is saying. If you go into the Ashba, it makes it Muktza. Rav Papa, if you threw away garments, it would be Asa. And he doesn't bring a Brisa or a Mishna to prove this, though there are such Brisas and Mishnayos. To have a look at them, the Perek and so on. He just says this is ridiculous. Lo Shamanu, we've never heard and we've never seen. Screen is Lo Shamanu, we've never seen and we've never heard that that throwing away a usable beged, a large beged, should be Asa. I don't want to give too many private and personal details away, but I literally had this mice on Shabbos. I took my socks off and discovered that there was a hole in them and put them into the bin. And then I don't know if anyone else has ever had a sock that has a hole in, but if you ever do, and literally this Shabbos morning, I took out a pair of socks and discovered one of the hole in, so I put it in the bin and took out a different pair of socks. And it led me thinking, this is literally this halacha, right? I've thrown away a garment. Is it now Muktza? Like, what happens if I suddenly realize I've got another socks in the thing and I'm going to have to walk around with a with a holding? Can I take it out of the bin or not? Have I just made it Muktza? So this is very. I was very pleased that this happened on literally this in Hashgacha process. This literally happened this Shabbos morning. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I've done it. Okay. So he says, no, we've misunderstood the brisa. If you throw away a broken, semi-broken keli miboid yom, then it's asa. But if you throw away on Shabbos, it's not asa. And with that, I've resolved my question from a garment. The basic question in the Gemara is, what exactly has Rav Papa solved? Why is miboid yom any better? Does that mean that if you throw away a garment miboid yom, then it's muktza? Is he okay with that, or does he somehow think there's a chiluk that miboid yom somehow answers the question? Tosfos addresses this question, and it's not entirely clear what Tosfos' answer to the question is. Tosfos here says, now it doesn't, because we can ask again, if Rav Papa's problem is that throwing away a garment, we have never heard of such a halacha. Have we heard of a halacha that throwing away a garment on Erev Shabbos makes it muktzah? So he says, no, now we no longer the question. So it says the answer isn't that enochanami, if you throw away a garment from Beit Yom, is muktzah. The answer is no. There we understand there's a difference. A garment is mucham Beit Yom, and therefore even if you throw it away, it wouldn't become muktzah. Shad is not mucham Beit Yom, and therefore if you throw it away, it becomes muktzah. But on Shabbos itself, even if you throw it away, it doesn't become muktza. The Bryson never meant to say that if you do something on Shabbos, it becomes muktza. So what on earth is going on over here? This is completely mysterious. And if you throw something away on Shabbos and you would say it becomes muktza, we would have a raya that even a garment could become muktza, and that can't be. If you throw something away on Erev Shabbos and it becomes muktza, there you can't compare that to a garment. A garment is different. That's the maths of what Tosfos says, and we're left wondering what on earth this means. So here we come to something which we've successfully docked until now, because Muktza is overwhelming and I just couldn't handle everything in one go. But here we're forced to sort of bite the bullet. And again, this is not my own svaras over here. This is a sort of massive meta svara that weaves its way throughout Hilchos Muktza. I just felt this is the time now to introduce this concept, which is whether something is a keli or not, and whether something is Muktza or not, is not entirely synonymous. Normally speaking, something which is a keli is muchan, because a keli is dedicated and specified for your service. And normally speaking, something which isn't a keli is not muchan, because it's not specified and dedicated to your service. Now, there were some cracks or fissures between that alignment. For example, you have a klisha melachot, that's Muktza machmas kiss, I'm sorry, which is a keli, but because of its sensitivity and its specificity, it behaves very much like a stone, and it's Muktza, at least with respect to many other things. Then you have non-kelim, which are not muktzah. Well, okay, there's examples that are interesting, but don't really contradict this idea. Food is not a keli, but it's not muktzah. Okay, obviously, because we over literally said a keli is mukhan and a non-keli is not mukhan, but obviously there's other things which are as functional as kelim, food. But what happens when you have a non-keli that you prepare for use? If you take a stone and you decide to begin using it as a paperweight, is it that it becomes a keli? It's not really a keli. It's still the same. It's still a common garden stone, identical in every respect to every other stone in the garden, but somehow it's muffin. So can we begin cracking apart the two concepts and have kelim which cease to be muffin, and maybe even non-kelim which are muffin? So again, we're not going to solve this problem in every sugya in Shas, because this is a massive meta sort of shaila in Hilchos Muktza. But here we're looking at one example of this, because what we're really addressing when we're talking about throwing away this keli, this sugya is one of the sugyas that's talking about taking a keli, which is a keli, it's usable, it's still a great sock, but nonetheless, I am saying for me it's not muchan. And there's two things that sort of come out in this sugya that we need to think about. The first is my ability to make a keli non-muchan, because I don't want to use it anymore, because in my spoiled Northwest London life, socks with holes in, I don't particularly want to wear, number one. And number two, what happens if this is subjective to me rather than objective? In other words, to a wealthy person, I throw it away, but to a poor person, you keep it. To what degree do I have subjective control? Is it about the owner and their intentionality, or is it about general society and so on. And this gets into data ideas that we met in Hilchos Brachos and other areas. Maybe a person doesn't have complete ownership over things. You can't redefine things in a completely contrarian manner to how everyone else deals with things. The mashal we used in Hilchos Brachos was a pen is a writing implement. You can write with lipstick or ketchup bottles if you wish, but maybe a person can't redefine them as a pen. You can use them with pen functionality. You can write with them. But you can't relabel them because it's so fundamentally not what it is. It's so fundamentally contrary to how everyone else views it. Bottle or data, your data is bottled. You can't redefine something. Another extreme example of this is in an island of cannibals. Would human flesh have the din of a machal, have the din of a food with respect to kabolos tumah of machalim? Now you may say, what difference does this make? It's anyway Tommy because it's Tommy Mace. It's not true. There's differences in Shiurim and Halachas of Tommy Mace and Tumas Macholim. So could it be a Machol that can become Tommy if we could find the gulf? This isn't my own example. This is the Rishonim's example. And the answer is Batladato. A human is not an item of food. How do you say cannibal in Yiddish, by the way? I don't know my Rosh Hashiva, so I don't say Yiddish word. You want to know the word for cannibal in Yiddish? Menschenfresser. Lovely Yiddish word. Okay. So in an island of cannibals, would a human become an item of food? And the answer is no, a human doesn't become an item of food. Bottled data, you can't redefine a human as a food. A human is something more than that, too significant to be an item of food. Okay, so these are examples of bottled data. These are the sorts of ideas that we're not going to touch on all of them, but these are ideas that float around in the sugya. Familiar ideas. To what degree am I, as the Baalim, able to redetermine the status of this, or to what degree is it tone on objectivity? To what degree, if for everyone else it's something and for me it isn't, is that bottle dato? But for our purposes, what is the relationship or the balance between a keli and hachana? And that's what we're looking at when we throw away a keli on Shabbos. Okay, so to analyze this now back into the sugya of Rav Papa and the Brisa, I appreciate this is sort of parachuting ideas in that are not muchach. In other words, who says this is what's going on? I'm just telling you that we've avoided this issue out of convenience because it's overwhelming, but this is how the postscript sort of understands what's going on in the sugya. The assumption of Rav Papa seems to be, and this is again other sugyas, but a reputable assumption, although some argue on it, is that on Shabbos, you can't change the status of something as being Muktza or not Muktza in a very particular sense. The essence of Muktza is something Muchan before Shabbos or not? Was it Muchan or not? You can't make something Muchan on Shabbos. So in Hilchos Muktza, if something came into Shabbos as Muchan, it remains Muchan. However, if it's become something different, then that something different may not be Muchan, or that something different may be Muktza, because it's a different object. So you can't make something go from Muchan to not Muchan on Shabbos. However, you can perhaps change it from being a Keli to being a non-Keli on Shabbos, in which case it would become Muktza, not because you're changing in essence its Hachana status, but because you're changing the foundation that lies behind that of it ceases to be a Keli. That's the maths of what the postscript understands as going on over here in the sugya. So the Rishonim, so the maths of what seems to go on over here is that Rav Papa seems to understand that Zarka b'ashba means on Shabbos. That's his Havamina. You threw it into the bin on Shabbos, and it can't be that by throwing it into the bin you're saying I still see this as a keli, but I'm making it mukta. And that's why the Brisa says it becomes Muktza on Shabbos, because you can't make things Muktza on Shabbos. That's the whole point of Muktza. If something is Muchan when Shabbos comes in, then it's Muchan over Shabbos. And if something's not Muchan when Shabbos comes in, then it's not Muchan. So it can't be that going on, that it becomes Muktza. Elamai, says Rav Papa, what must it be saying? It must be saying that the act of throwing something into a bin on Shabbos is determining that it's not a keli. Wow. People throwing things into bins means that you have the ability to say this is not a keli. If that's the case, then even a beged, if you throw into a bin, why can't it become a non-keli? In which case it would become mukta on Shabbos. That's the reasoning of Reish Lakish. Again, Reish Lakish looks at a brisa that he thinks is saying that if you throw something away on Shabbos, it becomes mukta. This can't be a halacha in hachana, because the whole point of Shabbos, at least according to Rav Papa's understanding and the mainstream opinion, is that things don't become muchan or non-muchan, become muktzah or non-muktzah on Shabbos. So how can it become muktzah if you throw it away into the bin? What does the Brisa mean? It must be that my act of throwing something in a bin means that I, as a private owner, have the koyach to take a perfectly usable item and make it non-kedi on Shabbos. In that case, even a beged, why can't I take it and make it a non-kedi on Shabbos? Therefore, says Rav Papa, that's ridiculous. You can't make a beged muktzah on Shabbos. We have rayas not like that. We've never heard such a thing. Elamai, we're talking about on Erev Shabbos. Erev Shabbos, I understand, because on Erev Shabbos we can be talking about hachana. If we're talking about in Hilchas hachana, there I can understand that you can make this object non-muchan on Erev Shabbos. And in the world of hachana, I can see that you can't make a beged non-muchan on Shabbos, non-muchan, because the beged is muchan. So were it to be saying a radical chiddush that throwing things away gives the owner the ability to de-kaliize something, I would have a problem because I don't know how to distinguish them between a beged and this object that I'm throwing away. Whereas if we're talking about hachana and functionality, there I can hear that this thing which has a very specific hachana, if for me as an owner it's useless, it's not muchan. Whereas a beged which has a very generic hachana, even if I'm throwing it in the bin, people could go rummaging in the bin and take it out of the bin and use it. It still has its hachana, it's still a beged. It doesn't fit my deluxe standards, but nonetheless it's still a beged. So this is the very, very beautiful reading of the Achronim. Again, this is not my own Maramakum. I wish I knew all this foreign, but I saw this quoted in Achronim, a sefer that's close to home to us here in England. There's a very, very beautiful sefer on the Tosefta called Chazon Yecheskel by Chatzkel Abramsky, who was the Av Basin in London after the war, and he's the one that sort of spells out this maths of the sugya, but it's reflecting a much bigger consensus of thought. He's just the one that most clearly lays out this way of thinking. Okay, so just to summarize the maths of what Rav Papa is saying and the implication in the Lomdus. Rav Papa is saying that in the world of hachana, I get there's a difference between an item with a use, but nonetheless nothing singles it out for this use, and therefore it's within the owner's power to say I need that use or I don't need the use, and therefore I can change its hachana status. But as opposed to a beged, which is fundamentally useful, and therefore you can't change its hachana process. But Rish Lakish thought the Bryce was telling me a much more radical chiddush, which is that I can take a kedi and declare this a non-kedi, and that therefore can even take place on Shabbos, in which case even a beged could be declared a non-kedi. What this also leads us to is that we're operating on two levels. You have the underlying sort of fabric of reality, which is something a kedi or not? It's a human-centric reality about our use of kelim, but that's determined by the objective usefulness of something. And then you have hachana, which is determined by the subjective needs of the person. Hachana, you can't change on Shabbos, but you can change on Erev Shabbos. And in the realm of hachana, the owner, at least with something which has a narrow use, is able to say this is not muchan. In the realm of objective kedi status, Rav Papa is not prepared to accept that you can make this from a kedi not into a kedi, and therefore he was puzzled by the idea that you can do that on Shabbos. And he said, if you can, then this is a radical chiddush. It would even apply to kelim or not. That's the sort of summary of the maths of the sukkah as per the Chazon Cheskel summary, but reflecting consensus. Rafal, you had a question, Karen and Adam. It's going to order their hands went up. Yeah.
Putting a beged in the bin before.
Yes.
What is that?
So Rav Papa would argue it remains a kedi because it just is a kedi, and it remains muchan because even in the bin it has all sorts of functionality. All you can say is I don't have hachana for it.
Why can't we answer that then on Shabbos as well?
Because on Shabbos he understood the only realm this can be operating in is whether this is a kedi or not, and in that world he didn't see that there was a difference. Very interesting. He didn't see there's a difference between a relatively minor use kedi and a maximal use kedi, like a beged. He sees there's a difference in hachana because even if I don't need it, other people want a beged. Whereas with a fragment of clay, there's plenty of fragments around. So if I don't need it, if it's not muchan for me, then no one's ever going to go and rummage in the bin because you can get a fragment of clay somewhere else, and therefore it's not muchan for anywhere. So in the world of hachana, he understood you can distinguish between very useful things which are still useful and minorly useful things which are only useful to the owner. It was only clutching on to being a muchan thing because for me it had a use, but if it ceases for me to have a use, not. Whereas in the realm of kelim, the idea that you can de-kadiize something that he doesn't understand. So I'm not claiming this is super intuitive, this distinction. I'm just saying that this is how the maths of the sugya works out, and it raises very important questions. Yeah.
Two questions. One is could you not make a distinction between a complete Kelim, like a beggar, and a component of a Kelim, like a maguf, because the one has a context. If you don't have the barrel, the pork, the stock is only useful if you think about a context, and therefore if you throw it away, you can downgrade it. And just the parallel would be to a button on the shirt rather than shirt as a top.
Okay, so this gets to, you could, and indeed we do make such a distinction. This gets to the pronouns in the earlier part of the brisa about what we're talking about and the distinction. All the Pop is saying is now that this, whatever this X that you're throwing away is a Keli, because it's not Mukhon, and Mukhon, because before we throw it away, it's not Muktza, and nonetheless, in the act of throwing it away, it becomes Muktza, and in that, Papa doesn't think there's a distinction.
Same question. So if you took a perfectly good Kelim before Shabbos and you wrapped it away,
yes,
if you didn't want to use it on Shabbos, would you create Muktza?
No, unless it's something where there would be a contradiction between using it on Shabbos and future use. So let me just explain this point. It doesn't become non-muchon just because I happen not to be planning to use it on Shabbos, and it's my slave, it's a Kelim, and if I now suddenly do need to use it on Shabbos, why shouldn't I change my mind? The only case where my planned future use means that it's not muchon now is where using it now would contradict future use. And there's some examples of that. One is Muktza machmas and kiss. In using it now where it's delicate, I risk damaging it and therefore risk losing future use. Another example of that is grogos of smukin, where I put them away to dry on the roof. And if I'm impatient and eat them now, I will never get my dried fruit. And therefore, in putting it away, I'm being muktzit midas, because I'm saying I can't use it now because that would contradict future use. Whereas a regular thing, it's a plate. I'm not planning to use the plate on Shabbos, but there's nothing in using the plate that in the future I'm planning to only use it Sunday. There's nothing in using it on Shabbos that contradicts use on Sunday, and therefore its status as a Kelim is too powerful for it to cease to be muchon. These are subtle svaras, which is why I sort of wanted to avoid this distinction of muchon zon. But at some point in accurate learning the sugi, we have to come onto this, and this is the point where I felt we have to sort of deal with this. Sorry, Adam.
I'm just interested in the contradiction. We're comparing a Gufa with a Glime.
Yes.
Now, a Glime, I would say, is the least Muktza type item. Potentially, when they introduced Muktza, certain things were exempt, and there's some views, I think, clothes were exempt.
Yes.
But there is actually something in between, like a chair and a table. So, do we say, how do we read chair and table if you throw a chair away? Would that be because it sits in between the Glime and the Magufa?
Okay, I think that's a fantastically helpful comment because it brings out exactly Rav Papa. Rav Papa, I think, deliberately chose an extreme example, which is bringing out his point. He's saying if the chiddush of the brisa is that on Shabbos you can make something not be a Kelim, then I don't think there's a difference between a glime, an item of clothing, a piece of furniture, or a rubbish Kelim like a chavis or a magofis a chavis. Because if you can make it non-Kelim, you can make it non-Kli. However, in the realm of hachana, I can hear difference between how much use something has and therefore to what degree it's muchon. Now, you're now asking a second question, which is, okay, where on the spectrum of usefulness are you able to make something non-useful by throwing it away? And indeed, that's a good question. The basic answer, Halacha, I'm cheating here, is going to Halacha sources, is very near the bottom of the spectrum. Only when we get to really unuseful things. And this ties into the Gemara later about how large the beged is, how large the cloth is, and so on. But basically, normal strong Kelim, which have multiple uses, remain anything that has a use that it remains fundamentally useful and it's distinguished from things that, just blocks of stuff around would remain useful. If you put a chair on your skip, you could imagine someone coming and picking it up. If you put a brick or a shard, not a brick even, a shard, no one would pick it up. That's the level that we're talking about in modern sort of terminology. Yeah.
That's just in the same way as what the item is and quite how useful it might be can depend on whether you can that or that. Does where it's put ultimately there's a difference between your bin at home that's relatively clean that containably you might say, oh gosh, I wish I'd kept that, and putting it on the sort of communal dung heap in your factory.
Okay, so I'll finish because we've gone over time. I want to do two things in the next year just to tidy up this thing, and then we'll move on to the next sugya. And that's basically to look at the Shulchan Aruch, the Mishnah Berurah, and the Biur Halacha. I will argue that the language of the Shulchan Aruch is mashma not like this whole piece we just said. Shulchan Aruch seems to say that what's going on is it ceases to be a kli, and a Biur Halacha begins discussing this question about where you throw it away and does that make a difference. So we'll get to both of those. Just in advance for next year, I really want to start learning the sugya of Krumis, the top of Kuf Chaf Hey Amud Aleph, and I'll be needing to send my comments for that for Tuesday. So try and do Chazorah on this topic and then move on. For now, the main thing I want you to just file away is that we've met for the first time. We've sort of begun really thinking a little bit more clearly about the difference between Hachana and Kelim and a very beautiful structure of the Chazon Yecheskel, even though it appears the structure is not correct in the Shulchan Aruch, and I don't really have anywhere to go with that. I don't know how the Shulchan Aruch read the Gemara, but either way, the concepts are right, even if the application of the concepts is controversial to this particular subject. Okay, thank you so much, everyone.